We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Vavam and Bezim Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 56b. On the previous summit, the Gemara said that dam, the blood, it becomes disqualified at Shkias Hachama when the sun sets. In other words, when the animal is slaughtered as a korban, that blood has to be applied to the Mizbeach before Shkias Hachama, before the sun sets. Once the sun sets, it is disqualified, and the Gemara learned that out from a pasuk. But the Gemara now asks, that pasuk is legufe. It's needed for what the pasuk itself is talking about. Rashi explains, legufe lelamed zman achilas shlamim biyom zevichaso mimachras. The actual context of the pasuk is saying that by a korban shlamim, the time to eat the korban shlamim is the day it's slaughtered and the next day, and that's what the pasuk is actually teaching. It's not really teaching about the disqualification of the blood at Shkias Hachama. And the Gemara says to that, imkain, if so, if that's all the pasuk was teaching, so neima kra, the pasuk could have just said biyom zivcho yeyachel. It could have just said on the day it's slaughtered, that's when it's eaten. The way the pasuk would go on is umimacharas, and the next day as well. But hakrivo lamali, why does it have the word hakrivo in the pasuk? Talks about the offering. Shma mina, so you see the drasha that we said in the previous Amud. B'yom shata zoveach ata makriv, on the day that you slaughter, you need to do the offering, the application of the blood. B'yom she'iyata zoveach, but if it's not the day of the slaughtering, iyata makriv, that's not the day you can do the offering, that's not the day you can do the applications of the blood. But the Gemara continues, V'dilma, but maybe, hachi kamar achmona, maybe what the pasuk actually means is as follows. Maybe it means, ikariv dam ha'idna, if the blood is offered right now today, so nesachel basar ha'idno lamachar, so then the meat is going to be eaten now and then the next day, because again it's 2 days. And ikariv dam lamachar, but the pasuk means to say that if the blood is offered tomorrow, if it's offered the next day, so everything gets pushed off. Nesachel basar lamachar liyom ochara, so then the meat is going to be eaten the next day and then the day after that. And the Gemara says to that, imkain, if so, if that's what the pasuk meant, so neima kra, the pasuk could have just said biyom hakrivo yochel, on the day of the offering, that's when it's eaten. Zivcho lamali, so why does it have to say zivcho? Why does it say the slaughtering? Shma mina, again you see biyom shata zovech, that on the day that it's slaughtered, atam hakrivo, the pasuk means to say that's when you offer the blood. Biyom she'iyata zovech, if it's not the day of the slaughtering, iyatam hakrivo, that is not the day to offer the blood. And Rashi explains, V'dil mahachi kamar achmona, maybe the pasuk means to say, the lo talar achmona zman achila bezvicha. Maybe the pasuk is saying that the time to eat it is not dependent on the time of the slaughtering, ela bezrika, but maybe it means it's dependent on the time of the throwing of the blood. La'ochlo biyom zrikaso memacharas. Maybe the pasuk is saying it should be eaten on the day of the zrikas hadam and the next day. And again, the Gemara said that is not what the pasuk means, and the Gemara ultimately derived that the pasuk is saying there's a disqualification in terms of the application of the blood at Shkias Hachama. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. Itmar, it was stated the following machlokas amoroim. Hamechashev la'or shlishi. Let's say a person has in mind, this is talking about having in mind outside of the proper time, that's pigul. A person has in mind to consume the meat of the korban after the designated time. But here, the person has in mind that he's going to consume the meat of the korban at the night of the third day. What that means to say is, the amount of time to eat the meat of the korban shlamim is the day of the slaughtering, and then that night, and then the next day. That really is the end of the time period. Already once you get to the next night, that's already too late. So that would seem to be a situation of pigul, but that's going to be a machlokas amoraim. Chizkiya amar kosher. Chizkiya says in that case, the korban is still kosher. It's not considered to be pigul in such a situation. Rabbi Yochanan amar pasel, but Rabbi Yochanan says no, there's a disqualification there because ultimately the person is having in mind to consume the meat after the proper time. And the Gemara explains what the machlokas amoraim is. Chizkiya amar kosher. Chizkiya says it's kosher, it's not pigul. Tahalo intik l'sreifa, because it's not yet the time where it's supposed to be burned. The halacha is that this meat, even though it's no longer the time of eating the meat, that time has passed, but it's actually not burned until the morning. So you're kind of in an interim type of period, and so therefore it's not considered a machshev as pigul. Rabbi Yochanan amar pasal, Rabbi Yochanan says no, it's disqualified. Because at this point it can't be eaten anymore, and so therefore again it is considered in such a situation to be pigul. That's a machlokas amoraim. And the Gemara continues with a similar machlokas amoraim. Ha'ochel la'or shlishi. Let's say a person eats the meat already the night of the third, so now he's eating it too late. So in such a situation, when you eat nosar, there is liability in such a situation, a liability for eating nosar. So the question is there liability in this case? Chizkiya amar pater. Chizkiya says pater in this case. That's talking about potter from a carbon. Let's say it's a shogeg, a situation of shigagas nosar. He says potter to lo intik l'sreifa, because again you haven't eaten it at the time where it should have been burned. That's why you don't have that liability. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayev. Rabbi Yochanan says no, there is a liability. Because at this point it's not supposed to be eaten, and he's eating it already. It's considered eating nosar, and there is liability. The Gemara continues. Tanya Kavasei Rabbi Yochanan. We have a brisa that supports Rabbi Yochanan that it is considered to be beyond the proper time. There is liability. Let's say you have karbanos that are eaten for one day. So when it comes to the blood, so then already from the time of sunset, that's a time, whereas mechashvin b'daman, that's a time where the machshava, that thought, is going to be considered a thought of pickle. We'll see Rashi in a moment. Uviv sarn, when it comes to the meat, uvei mureyan, and when it comes to the sacrificial portions on the mizbeach, mishayala amur hashachar. So then the time that we go by is the time of amur hashachar. This is our case. Let's say you have karbonos that are eaten for 2 days and a night, like a carbon shlamim. So they're mechashvin b'dam mishatishka acham. When it comes to the blood, we go by sunset. Again, already at that point in time, it's too late. Let's say the person has intention to throw the blood after sunset. That's going to be machshavas pigel. Uveimureyan mishayala amur hashachar. When it comes to the sacrificial portions, it's already too late by amur hashachar when the dawn comes. And the part that is like Rabbi Yochanan is here. Uviv saran. When it comes to their meat, mishatishka hachama shel shnei yamim. When you get to sunset after 2 days, meaning again exactly what Rabbi Yochanan said, when you get to that night of the third, l'or shlishi, Rabbi Yochanan is going to say there is going to be a liability in that situation. That's when you get to the time of the machshavas pickle. If he has in mind that it's going to be at that point in time, he's going to consume the meat. Already shkias hachama shel shnei yamim, the or shlishi. In that situation, it is going to be a case of disqualification. It's going to be a case of pickle. And Rashi explains, mechashvin b'daman mishateshka acham, in terms of the machshava by the blood, that goes by sunset. Meaning, im shachar al menas lizrok daman, if he slaughters the animal with the intention to throw the blood, mishateshka acham, that he's going to throw it too late, he's going to throw it after sunset, pigel, that's considered to be pigel. Again, that's considered a machshava of consumption after the proper time. Uvi achilas basar, let's say he's thinking about the improper time by the eating of the meat, or uvahaktarase mureim, or when it comes to the burning of the sacrificial portion. If he's thinking at the time of the slaughtering that he's going to eat the meat or he's going to burn the emurim, from already the time of dawn, that's already when it's too late to do that. So pigel, that's considered to be pigel, because that's outside of their proper time. And the proper text then, this is the part that supports Rabbi Yochanan. If those kinds of karbonos that are eaten for 2 days and a night, again, the blood is the same. There the machshava goes by sunset. Uve'imur mishi'alam rashachar, by the sacrificial portions, it's also the same. It goes by dawn. Uvevsara mishatishka chama shel shnei yamim, but by the meat, it's when you have sunset after the 2 days. V'hainu la'or shlishi Rabbi Yochanan. That is or shlishi, exactly like Rabbi Yochanan said. Linyan dam ve'imurin, Rashi just notes, by blood and sacrificial portions, kachei kachim v'kachim kalam shav, and there all karbonos are the same. The dam ve'imurin liolam kachei kachim heim, because blood and sacrificial portions those always have a status of Kodshei Kodshim. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught, Yochol Yehu Nechonon L'or Shlishi. One might think, when it comes to a carbon shlamim, which is eaten again for 2 days, so then maybe it could also be eaten that night of the third. Vidinu, and it would be logical as follows. Zevachim Nechonon L'yom Echad. You have karbonos that are eaten for 1 day. When we say 1 day, it means the day of the slaughtering and the following night. Uzvachim Nechonon L'shnei Yamim. And then you have karbonos that are eaten for 2 days, which is the day of the slaughtering, the night, and the following day. But we should say as follows: just like karbonos which are eaten for 1 day, laila acharein, the 1 day means that you can eat it that night as well. So so too karbonos that are eaten for 2 days, laila acharein, maybe the night that follows that second day, that should also be included in the eating. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says v'hanosar ad yom. It says hanosar ad yom, whatever remains, and what that means is ba'od yom hu nechol. It has to be eaten while it's still day. Ve'eno nechol or shlishi. It's not eaten once you get to the night of the third day. The Brisa continues, Yachol Yisarif Miyad. Now one might think, therefore, it should be burned immediately, because now you've arrived at the time where it's no longer eaten. Vidinhu, and that also is logical. Zvachim Necholin Liyom Echad, you have karbonos that are eaten for one day. Uzvachim Necholin L'shnei Yomim, you have karbonos that are eaten for 2 days. Mazvachim Necholin HaNecholin Liyom Echad, just like by karbonos that are eaten for one day, take of Lachilas Sreifa, immediately when you reach the point in time where they can't be eaten, they're burned, because again, it's the nighttime that you're eating, and then if the morning comes, that's when you burn it. So av zvachim hanechon l'shnei yamim, so to karbonos that are eaten for 2 days, take of lachilas reifa. If we're saying that at the end of the second day you can no longer eat it, so you should burn it immediately. Talmud lomer bayom hashlishi bo'eshi sarif. If the pasuk says on the third day is when you burn it, meaning bayom atasarfa, it should be burned during the day, via tasarfa b'layla, it should not be burned at night. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah HaBechor when it comes to the firstborn animal, VaHaMeiser when it comes to Meiser, which is talking about Meiser Behema, the 10th animal, VaHaPesach, and when it comes to Karban Pesach, Kodshim Kalim, these are considered to be Kodshim Kalim, of lesser holiness, and Shchitason B'chol Makom Ba'azara, they're slaughtered anywhere in the Azara, V'damon Ton Matana Achas, and their blood, it requires one application. Rashi explains Matana Achas to Loksibu Saviv, it doesn't say that the blood is applied around the Mizbeach, Ella V'yaz Damam Tizrok Ksiv B'Bechor. It just says you throw the blood by Bechor. The others are learned from Bechor. That's Matana Achas. And the Mishnah continues, Uvilvad She'it and Keneged HaYesod. As long as the blood is applied by a part of the Mizbeach where there is the Yesod, where there is the base. Rashi explains, Keneged HaYesod b'makom sheyesh yesod tachtov. It means an area of the Mizbeach where there is a base beneath. L'mu'utei mizrach v'daram, that comes to exclude the east and the south, essentially most of the eastern wall, most of the southern wall, and the southeast corner. There was no yesod. And again, we've mentioned this earlier. In this situation, when it comes to these karbonos, you have to apply the blood in an area of the Mizbeach where there is a yesod. And the Mishnah continues, Shina b'achilosan, when it comes to the eating of these karbonos, they are different. Rashi explains, Shina b'achilosan, afa pi shehishva hakasav es matan domam, even though when it comes to the application of the blood, Bechor, Meiser, and Pesach are all the same, but Shina b'achilosan zeh means that when it comes to their consumption, their eating of them, so there they are different, as the Mishnah now explains. Ha-Bechor nechol lekohanim, the Bechor, that's eaten by the Kohanim. Rashi says, Ha-Bechor nechol lekohanim, k'nechsivu v'soram yieloch, it says that the meat belongs to you, talking about the Kohanim. But when it comes to Meiser Behema l'chol adam, anyone is able to eat that. Rashi explains, Meiser l'chol adam shalom matzino lo b'Torah sheinasan l'kohen. There we don't find, the Torah doesn't say that it needs to be given to the Kohen. V'necholin b'chol ho'ir, and it's eaten in the entire city. It's eaten in the entire city of Yerushalayim. B'chol meichel, and prepared in any fashion. L'shnei yomim v'layla echad, by both Bechor and Meiser, they're eaten for 2 days and 1 night. But ha-Pesach eino nechol ela b'layla. But when it comes to Karban Pesach, that's only eaten at night. Ve'eino nechol ela ad chatzos, it's only eaten until midnight. Ve'eino nechol ela l'menuyav, it's only eaten by those who are registered for it. Ve'eino nechol ela tzli, and it's only eaten roasted. And Rashi explains, V'necholin b'chol ha'ir b'chol meichel. Garas, that's the proper text. V'lo garsina l'chol adam. We don't say l'chol adam over here. To hakatani b'chor l'kohanim, because we already said that the b'chor is different. That's only for kohanim. B'chol ha'ir, in all of the city of Yerushalayim, k'nechsiv ha'avesam shama olosechem, v'zivchechem, v'es masrosechem, v'tanya v'sifri. Rabbi Akiva Omer, v'shtei maisros hakasam medaber. This pasuk, when it says maisrosechem, it's 2 maisros. Meiser behema, v'echad meiser behema, v'echad meiser dagon. We're talking about meiser behema, which is what we're talking about in this Mishnah, and also the meiser by grain. Uchsib bahu kro v'choros b'karchem v'tzonchem, and we do lo kava b'hu mechitza shma mina b'chol ha'ir necholin. And from the fact that it doesn't say anything about a particular mechitza, a particular area it has to be eaten in, it means to say in the entire area of Yerushalayim, that's where these are eaten. L'shnei yomim v'layla echad, for 2 days and a night, but b'chor yalaf lo v'gemar, the Gemara will learn this out by b'chor. Meiser, says Rashi, lo yadana mehecha, I don't know a source for the shnei yomim v'layla echad. Ela b'layla, again, it's only eaten at night. That's talking about the Karban Pesach, k'dechsib b'layla hazeh, like it says b'layla hazeh. Ve'eno nechol ela ad chatzos b'gemar yalaf lo, in terms of midnight, the Gemara will learn it out. L'menuya, for those who are registered to it by the Karban Pesach, shenimnu b'dmei l'kichaso, they're registered by the when it was purchased, k'dechsib l'fiyachlo tachosu, as it says in the pasuk. And the Gemara says, Man Tana, the Gemara says, who is the Tana? Rashi explains, Man Tana, Meiser upesach bizrika. Who's the Tana of our Mishnah that says that when it comes to the Meiser behema, when it comes to Karban Pesach, you do zrika, you throw the blood, midamashri matan damim bechor u'maiser pesach, because it says that the blood application is all the same for these karbanos. The kotani shino b'achilosim, because the Mishnah says the eating of these karbanos are different from one another. Mechlal dematan damim lo shina, that sounds like the application of the blood is not different. U'bechor ksiv yes damim tizrok, it's by bechor where it says that the blood is thrown, so it would seem to be saying that in all these cases the blood is thrown. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Chisda says, who is the Ta'an of our Mishnah? Rav Yossi HaGalili, it's Rav Yossi HaGalili. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brayso, Rav Yossi HaGalili Omer, Rav Yossi HaGalili says, Chelbo lo nemar, it doesn't say in the pasuk Chelbo in singular, Ela Chelbam, it says Chelbam. Domo lo nemar, it doesn't say Domo in singular, Ela Domam, rather it says Domam. It seems to be talking about multiple karbonos in this pasuk. We'll take a look at the full pasuk. The full pasuk is talking about Bechor, Ach Bechor Shor, Bechor Kesav, Bechor Ezlo, Sifta Kodeshem, as Domam Tizrok al Mizbeach, the blood you throw on the Mizbeach, Ves Chelbam Taktir, the fat, the sacrificial portions you burn, Isha L'Reich Nichoach L'Hashem, and so it's using the plural. So what is it talking about that it's using the plural over here? And so the Brayso says, Rabbi Yossi HaGalili says, Limed al Bechor u'Maiser u'Pesach. It's teaching not only about Bechor, but Bechor, Maiser, and Pesach. Shetaunin, Matan, Domim, ve'imurin l'gavim mizbeach. They all require application of the blood and sacrificial portions on the mizbeach. Keneged hayesod, corresponding to the yesod, corresponding to the base of the mizbeach. And Rashi explains, Damo lo nemar, doesn't say Damo ach Bechor shor. Again, that's the pasuk. And Rashi says this shita, this opinion of Rabbi Yossi HaGalili, who's it different than? Aval Rabbi Yishmael. It's different than Rabbi Yishmael, because according to Rabbi Yishmael, Pesach b'shvicha, the carbon Pesach actually is not done through zrika, through throwing the blood, but through pouring the blood. Because he learns the application of the blood by carbon Pesach from a different pasuk, from dam zevachim yishafach, and this we learned earlier, and so therefore the point of the Gemara is that our Mishnah follows Rabbi Yossi HaGalili, that all these karbanos have the same application of the blood, again, that it's always done through zrika. That would be the opinion of Rabbi Yossi HaGalili. And the Gemara continues and says, Keneged hayesod menolan. So how do we know that the application of the blood has to be where there is a base to the mizbeach? And to that the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says, Asya zrika me'ola. We have a gzera shava, zrika from ola. And the Shinui in Itzcho says it's Amar Rabbi Eliezer. It shouldn't be Amar Rabbi Eliezer, but Amar Rabbi Eliezer. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Zayin Amud Aleph.